Hi everyone, welcome to another video for Repro Rehab. In today's video we're going to be talking about data science. Specifically we're going to be asking what is data science and maybe are you doing it already? My name is Keith Lose and I'm an associate professor of physical therapy and neurology at Washington University School of Medicine, and I'm one of the educational leadership team members for Repro Rehab. So a lot of times learners come to us with questions about data science and they're very interested in data science, but they aren't always so sure exactly what data science entails and what do they need to do in order to be a good data scientist or become a data scientist to begin with. So I thought a helpful place to start might just be Googling, what is data science? And according to IBM's website, for instance, data science combines math and statistics, specialized programming, advanced analytics, artificial intelligence, and machine learning with specific subject matter expertise to uncover actionable insights hidden in an organization's data. So we got a lot of things going on here, right? And I've highlighted some words in red to kind of indicate what is done or the things that you need. The goal, right, kind of highlighted in green, and then what it is being done to, which in this case is data. Similarly, we get some agreement if we look at the definition on Wikipedia, where data science is defined as an interdisciplinary academic field that uses statistics, scientific computing, scientific methods, processes, algorithms, and systems to extract or extrapolate knowledge and insights from noisy, structured, and unstructured data. So common things here, right, is that we're extracting or extrapolating, uncovering actionable insights. In general, we're trying to glean some new knowledge and new information. And we are doing that from data. So we're gaining new information from data. But how are we doing that? Well, we're using math, science, processes, algorithms, and systems. That's basically everything under the sun, right? It's an incredibly open-ended definition of what does a data scientist do, but this does help narrow the problem down a little bit. In general, we're going to be using some sort of computations. It's very process-driven with the explicit goal of gaining new information from data, whether those data are noisy, structured, or unstructured. So a follow-up question I might ask then is, what skills does a data scientist need? And I like thinking about the question in this way for a lot of reasons, but one in particular is that I think I grew up playing a lot of games where characters had their skills like very cleanly laid out for them, and that helped you understand a bit about who the character was. So for instance, if you played with Transformers like me as a kid, you got this wonderful art on the back of the boxes where it would give you, the character's name, kind of what their position was, a little bit about the character, and then down at the bottom here, it would give you sort of 8 different abilities or attributes scored on a scale of 0 to 10 that would tell you a little bit about who that character was and what they were good at, what they were bad at, and that gives you a sense of how that character might function, right? So Optimus Prime, for instance, as the supreme commander of all the Autobots, he's this big, tough, heroic leader. He basically maxes out everything. He's one of the smartest, he's one of the biggest, he's one of the strongest, but we can compare him with one of my favorite Autobots, which was always Bumblebee. Bumblebee is little and plucky. He's not particularly strong, but he's fast and sneaky. He's really good at espionage. So you can see, what Bumblebee lacks in strength, he makes up for in courage and skill. So being able to boil these things down to a couple of specific attributes helps you understand who that character is. And, maybe you didn't play Transformers, but maybe you play Dungeons and Dragons, right? So you know that strength is a key attribute for a fighter. Dexterity is going to be a key attribute for a rogue. Intelligence is going to be a key attribute for a wizard, right? Or maybe you were a fan of My Little Pony, right? And you knew that being proud, right, and also being dynamic is a key component of Applejack's personality, right? Whatever it was that you were interested in, there's probably, some BuzzFeed quiz that will tell you what character you were. And we're really trying to see what attributes make up that character. And I'd like to do the same thing with kind of different roles of data science to better understand what data science is. So the way we're going to approach this then is looking at the skill set for different data science jobs. So I've boiled this down to about 8 or so dimensions that I think are important for the job performance of a data scientist, or I should say a person in data science, because as we'll see kind of under the umbrella of data science jobs, there's a lot of things that get listed. I've broken out 3 common terms that are used in job postings for a data engineer, a data scientist, or a data analyst. And then this is based on my own experience, plus combing through a bunch of job postings on LinkedIn to see what kind of things get mentioned. And I want to emphasize again, this is like a rough definition. This is by no means an academic treatise on what data science is or what roles exist within data science, but I think this is a useful way of thinking about it and being able to identify your own strengths and weaknesses, areas where you might want to grow, and areas where you're already strong. So let's focus on data engineer as kind of the first job. So data engineers, if you look at those job postings, often have a greater emphasis on actual hardware and computational infrastructure, right, and data storage. So these are individuals who are really setting up the technology that allows for like large throughput processing, the management of petabytes, right, of information, and really being able to acquire, store, and transform that data on a large scale. So you're going to have a lot of skills kind of in the upper part of our radar graph up here. You're probably also going to be doing some software development. You're almost certainly writing programs, in some programming language. And you're going to be doing some amount of data wrangling in terms of being able to transform data from maybe a loose, unstructured format into something a little bit more structured. But most of the time, you aren't actually going to be doing as much work taking super raw data and taking it all the way through to an analysis. So you're probably doing a little bit less of data wrangling and sort of shaping data into purpose-built structures, but you are very familiar with the issues around data storage, right? What is like a data lake versus a data warehouse? What is a data lakehouse? These are kinds of things that you're probably going to be dealing with as a data engineer. In contrast, if you're a quote-unquote data scientist, right, if that's in the job description, some of those things are probably actually reduced in emphasis, and you're not expected to be maintaining the infrastructure that goes into all of the data processing that's being done, but you're going to be much more responsible for the data processing that's actually happening. And this is where a lot of truly big data jobs get posted, because you're going to be managing tremendous amounts of data and really trying to transform it from something relatively raw into a cleaner, tidier format, right? So you're going to wrangle that data. You're going to write a lot of software to do that. So, C++, Python, and R are very common programming languages that people need to know here. You're probably also going to be using things like Git and GitHub for version control. You're getting a little more into the analytical and the communications realm down here at the bottom end of our little figure, right? So you probably have like a good amount of experience with artificial intelligence and machine learning workflows. You might have a little bit less experience with traditional data analysis and mathematical statistics. And in general, you probably don't have to do as much writing or data visualization. You might be quite good at those things. Again, like this isn't to say that every data scientist is like this, but you probably on average don't see this emphasized as much in the job, because the data scientist usually isn't the person kind of taking it on that final hurdle to the key stakeholders to really say like, all right, now we have all the data in the shape that we want. We've analyzed the question several different ways, and here are the insights, that we've come down to. That skill set usually kind of comes at the tail end here in the data analyst position, right? And if a job is advertising for a data analyst, now they really probably don't need you to know that much about hardware or data storage, and you will be doing, like some software development probably, but most of the time you're going to be using code and packages that other people have written. So, you have to be a good Python programmer, you have to be a good R programmer, but there may not be as much emphasis on being able to write your own packages and put them out into the world for people to use. You're going to be really good at using existing packages and software that other people have written to get those actionable insights from the data that we need. So some of those, data science-y skills, the data scientist kind of skill set that's like big data-y in the middle of our graph have been reduced as well. But there's going to be a much greater emphasis on some of these skills that are down here at the bottom part of our graph. So, again, a lot of jobs are going to be calling for experience with AI and machine learning. You probably have a lot more knowledge in mathematical statistics and applied statistics, right? So sort of traditional data analytic methods. You have a greater burden now also on your written communication, your oral communication, and your data visualization. Because a big part of being a data analyst is going to be able to translate some of these complex analyses into something that is digestible and actionable for other members of your team, whether that's, a corporate team, or if you're in like a research setting, being able to translate some of this data to clinicians, right? You're going to be the person on kind of the tail end of the data pipeline, really trying to translate some of this complex information to an audience with a lot of diverse backgrounds. So there's going to be a much heavier emphasis on your ability to communicate some of those results in these roles. So I hope that helps in terms of thinking about some of the different skills that are required within data science, and specifically, a few different types of data science jobs. But one of the other things that I really want to emphasize here is that there's a lot more to data science than just big data. And if you're working in rehabilitation science, right, who is the target of our Repro Rehab education program, you probably aren't working with big data, right? In fact, most scientists aren't working with big data. Big data gets talked about a lot, but there's not a lot of people who are actually doing it, I would say, in my experience. So, some scientific research does involve big data. So this is a figure that I was able to find boiling down some data from 2021. But looking at the CERN Large Hadron Collider, their raw data, right, is using tens of millions of petabytes of data. So, a petabyte is massive. That is not a scale that we work on very often, right? To give you a frame of reference, Amazon Web Services, is using somewhere in the realm of like 1 million. The Netflix streaming, right, is around 100,000 petabytes. So these are huge data sets, but most of the data that we work with in scientific research is going to be happening down here. It's going to be less than 1 petabyte worth of data, right? Keep in mind, petabytes, that translates into less than 1,000 terabytes or less than 1 million gigabytes. So I don't think I've generated that much data in my research career. I don't even know if I've worked with over a petabyte of data really in my research career. And some people might be in this realm, if you're doing neuroimaging or if you're doing human genomics data, right, you might be dealing with things that are really quite big. If you're a data engineer, for instance, with a university, and you're managing the research infrastructure for a whole university, right, then yes, as a data engineer, you're probably working with over a petabyte of data. But if you are, one academic researcher running a lab or working within a research team, you probably aren't working with data on anything like this scale, and you're not really doing big data. But I want to emphasize that's totally okay. Most research data are not big. Again, some data sets in neuroimaging, human genomics, proteomics, those kinds of things are going to be big data sets where we're talking about many terabytes or petabytes of information. And those things are nice because they tend to be quite organized, right? The human genome has a natural structure built into it. It is huge. There's millions and millions of observations, but fundamentally we're just moving along this like chain of nucleotides and looking at, what letter is it in which place. Similarly with the brain, there's a lot of computation that goes into neuroimaging, but there's fundamentally a three-dimensional structure to the brain, and we carve it up into little 1 millimeter cubes, and then we can assign numeric values to all of those cubes. But most research data, right, are less organized and also smaller in scale. So this is what we refer to as the long tail of small data, where a limited number of research studies actually use large data, but most research studies are actually going to fall into this area right here on this figure, where in the published literature, if you look, randomized controlled trials, right, are taking lots of information, but it's not petabytes of information. And it's also not usually as structured as something like genetics data or brain data, because you're combining clinical assessments with maybe some online surveys, with maybe some motion capture data, right, or some electrophysiology data. So you have a lot of different types of information about individual participants that all come in different shapes and sizes. So these data are not big, but they are complicated. And that's great, because I think it's important to recognize that data science skills aren't just for big data. Data science skills are for everyone. And even if all of your data can fit on an Excel spreadsheet, data science skills are going to make your workflow more accurate, reproducible, and a heck of a lot faster. So that's part of the goal of Repro Rehab, is to help you build out these data science skills to improve your workflow and make it better. So how do we do that? Well, first let's consider kind of an old school or traditional data ecosystem in rehabilitation research. You might have in your lab, I think a lot of professors will laugh at this joke, but there's one lab computer that's not connected to the internet, so the programs aren't going to update because there was some software that was written a long time ago, and now the hardware isn't supported by new versions of that software, so you do not want this software to change. Basically, you want this computer as insulated as possible so that you can still collect your data. And then from there, you're going to store that data that you've collected on your computer. After that, you're probably backing some of that data up on the web, but there might be some errors. There might be some issues where files are lost forever. Maybe a research assistant actually deleted something, or there was a technological error. From the data that it does get backed up, right, you're going to do some formatting and some cleaning. You might recognize that there are some errors in the process, so you have to go back and reformat and re-clean. And then on the clean data, oh no, whoops, you realize that the analysis was done with the wrong data file, right? So now you have to go back and do this again. Once you do the analyses on the right data, now you're going to submit that to a journal. Some reviewer is going to provide their comments and they're going to suggest some new analyses. So now you have to go back to these data, maybe pull some things off the web, clean and format again, make sure everything else is being done correctly. Maybe you do some new and different analyses based on what the reviewer wants. Your paper gets published, hooray, right? But then 5 years later, someone asks about the raw data for a meta-analysis, and now you have to look in a file folder if you still have it, and you have to decide, which is the right data to send? Can I keep track of all of this? And it's a bit of a mess, right? At best, this is a very delicate ecosystem. It's incredibly fragile, and little perturbations anywhere along that process can really throw it off, leading to data loss or leading to errors in the computations. So instead, what we would like to see is a robust data ecosystem, right? Something that's nice and clean and organized that might look a little something like this, where we've got specific systems for collecting our data, storing it, wrangling it, how we use it internally, and then how we ultimately communicate that information to the outside world. And the more that we can really make these pipelines robust and reproducible, not only are we doing other people a favor because they can go back and see exactly what we did, but we're also doing ourselves a favor, right? Because like in the example that I mentioned, if someone wants your data for a meta-analysis, it's a lot easier to give them exactly what you need, or give them exactly what they need, if you have a pipeline like this, compared to if you have a pipeline that's a bit of a mess. So we really want you to learn to do things reproducibly, and to more clearly show what I mean by that, there's a few different words that get thrown around as almost synonyms, but we want to actually give them some specific meanings. So you can think about this as if we're using data that are the same or different, and if we're doing analyses that are the same or are different. If we're subjecting the same analysis to the same data, right? Maybe someone wants to recreate what I did, or I just need to recreate it, sometime in the future. That's what we mean by reproducible. If you get the same data, you feed it through the same analysis, you get the same result. And reproducibility is king because reproducibility is the only one of these things that's truly under our control, right? If someone has our same data and they do a different analysis, hopefully they come to the same conclusion. That's great. That means the conclusion is robust, but we can't ultimately control that, because if they do a different analysis, there's no guaranteeing they'll get the same conclusion. Similarly, if someone goes out and takes a new sample, right, now they do the same analysis, ideally they get the same result. That's great, because that would mean that our result replicates, but replicability, again, is not under our control. And in the best of all scientific worlds, if someone collects a new sample and they do a slightly different analysis, is there a conceptual agreement? Basically, is there a convergence between what they found and what we found? Because then that means our results are generalizing, right? And other researchers are able to get the same result in the same population, maybe even in a different population. So this is ideal, but again, it's not under our control if our results are generalizable or not. So the one thing that we can definitely control is if our results are reproducible, and that's going to help set up the other three areas here for success. So in order to build reproducible pipelines, that means we actually have to move away from manual computations. And that doesn't mean manual computations are fundamentally bad. They've been the standard in science for a long time, right? The old school laboratory notebook, or managing your data in a lot of different Excel spreadsheets. You absolutely can do science this way, and that doesn't mean that you're going to do it wrong. But these things are time intensive, they are more prone to errors, and they are fundamentally not reproducible. Because if you give me an Excel spreadsheet with your data and you give me a statistical output with your results, I would have to go and run your data through a program or click a series of menus if you did it in something like SPSS, right, in order to see if your results check out. If instead you switch to a code-based solution, right, using something like MATLAB, Python, R, just to name a few, that's going to be much faster, it's going to be much less prone to errors, and most importantly, it's going to be fundamentally reproducible, because if you give someone the data file and the code you use to analyze it, right, in any of these three languages, all they have to do is press run, and they can see if they get the same result that you do. And this is really important, right? Because it's going to save you so much time and energy. It can be a lot of work up front, right? Being able to make this switch to having better data science skills and having more reproducible pipelines in your research is going to be tremendous. Because think about, when you've analyzed some of your data, right? You've kind of looked at it to check some of your initial assumptions. You're doing kind of exploratory step just to make sure everything's in place, right? You're not like p-hacking. That's not what I'm trying to suggest. You're sort of running multiple analyses here, but you might be, trying to get everything ready with some small subsample of your data before all the data are collected. When all the data come in, if you have a manual system, you're going to now have to manually reprocess all that data. If you have a code-based system, right, now it's really easy to reprocess all the data because you simply change the input file, run that new bigger input file through the same code, and you'll get the new answer knowing that the data was handled in exactly the same way that it was before. So we really want you to think about how you can incorporate some of these data science skills into your work, right? But I also really want you to appreciate that the typical PhD student probably has more data science skills than they think. So, maybe early on in your PhD, you might feel like you're somewhere like this, where, okay, you've got pretty good written and oral communication skills, and you've done some data analysis, you've had a couple stats classes and you did a master's thesis, right? Some data visualization skills. But you've got a lot of room to improve here if you really want to grow in terms of data science. Well, Repro Rehab can help you take these skills in whatever direction you want. So for instance, if you want to fill in the kind of data engineering slice of this pie, right, you could think about some computer science-y growth. Maybe you want to create a project to collect, process, and store lots of different physiological signals. Maybe you need to write some software that would help your lab overcome some, really common technical challenge that they're facing. Alternatively, maybe you want to see some big data growth, right? Are you swimming in biomechanical and physiological data? Maybe you're trying to get into neuroimaging or genomics/proteomics data, right? That would allow you to kind of expand in your ability to wrangle large data sets, maybe implement some AI or machine learning to deal with the huge feature space that comes with that, right? And then actually maybe write some software along the way to help make a reproducible pipeline that you can share with others. Or, right, you could have analytics-y growth. Maybe you want to learn more about some complicated statistical models and how to really clearly communicate those things to your audience, right? You could go in this direction as well, really focusing on more of a mathematical statistics sort of implementation as opposed to machine learning, and really focusing on, okay, how do I present figures that are clear and accurate and give you the essence of the results? Right? Because you don't want to have a simplified result. You don't want it to be oversimplified, but you do want your result to be as simple as possible so that someone can see it and understand it, and they can gain those insights from the data. All right, so thank you very much. I hope this was useful for you in thinking about data science, what it is, what skills you might already possess, and how you want those skills to grow over the course of Repro Rehab. Thanks.